before I do that, I'm going to actually tell you a joke. It's completely unrelated, except it is a genuine recruitment joke. Apologies if you've heard it, but I was told it yesterday, and it tickled me. So a guy's been interviewed, and the interviewer says to the interviewee, well, you had a lot of opportunities to talk about your strengths. I'd like to know what your key weakness is. And he says, well, that's undoubtedly that I'm too honest. And the interviewer said, well, I'm not sure I agree that, you know, that's a weakness. He said, well, I don't give a fuck what you think. So what I'm going to try and do here is make this subject live a little bit and make it more relevant at a strategic and operational level, in the sense that what does actionable analytics really mean? Why should you care about them? And why, in my experience of running the S3 business, why were they important? But before I do that, I'll give you a little bit of background about myself. So I joined S3, it was 3 people in one office. I retired from S3 at the end of last year. We had 2,200 people in 64 offices in 18 countries. I'm not taking full 100% personal credit for that, of course. I had 1 or 2 colleagues to help me along the way. But I think that gives you some sort of idea of the scale and the magnitude of the journey that S3 went on. And this subject, the importance of actually understanding the business and what drives your business, was a key part of that success. I was the chief executive when I floated the business in November 2005 on the stock exchange, London Stock Exchange. Our current market capitalisation is 420 million. Actually, with the help of a favourable wind and a very good pound to dollar ratio back in 2007, we were actually briefly $1 billion company. So how do we go from 3 people to, at one point, $1 billion company, and indeed a company with aspirations to be a lot bigger than that in the future? I invested as a founder, actually that's not fair, in the second round, I guess, of investments. 1, 2 people had already backed Dan's vision back in November, and at the same time I became the non-executive chairman. Okay, so moving on. I'm going to try and give you a bit of context. The first thing is to talk about the nature of the recruitment marketplace. And a lot of this is actually bleeding obvious, but I think it's an important sort of starting point. The first thing to say is recruitment is a very fragmented market. We know that. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of recruitment companies in most sectors. And that's for some very good and very understandable reasons. The first one is that barriers to entry are exceedingly low. Okay, I imagine in this room there are any number of people that started a business off the back of actually learning their trade, working for somebody else. What I would counter with that is that barriers to entry may be very low, but significant barriers, and in particular to sustain success, are actually as challenging in recruitment as they are in most other industries. And that is, at least some way, precisely because barriers to entry are low. Therefore, competition gets created on an ongoing basis. But very, very few of those businesses ever really amount to very much. Now, sometimes it's a question of not being up for it as much as not being up to it, i.e., what I mean by that is entrepreneurs sometimes don't want to grow their businesses beyond a certain size because they want to keep control, they want to feel it's very much still their train set. But even when they have aspirations to grow the business, very often the ability to scale and replicate that business to make it a more substantial business eludes them, even with their best efforts. So with that thought in mind, what I'd like to sort of share is what I think are 4 key success factors that have enabled S3 to become a replicable, scalable business. I'll start with the right-hand quadrant because I actually think, and I think this chimes with James's presentation, that ultimately, if there's one pearl of wisdom, it is hire good people and keep them. And everything by degree is subservient to and subordinate to that particular idea. But talking about other aspects of it, I think it's very clear, you have to be very clear on what you are. Your strategy has to be very clear. And one aspect of that is that knowing what you aren't is as much about knowing what you are, and therefore excluding what might look like a great opportunity because it's not core to your strategy and therefore not distracting to your ultimate vision. The other 2 points really are more relevant to what I'm going to talk about. So on the bottom left-hand side is this idea of have a methodology that others can understand, have a modus operandi, make what you do something more of a science than an art. And ultimately, what underpins that and reinforces that is the ability to understand and measure what really drives your business. And that's really where analytics comes in. So let's talk a little bit about that again, trying to keep this more sort of strategic. If you want an in-depth demo of Cube 19, I'm sure Dan and the guys would be very happy to oblige. My job's more to keep it at a slightly more strategic level, I think. And the first thing is to actually make what I think should be a fairly obvious point, which is that recruitment is, by its very nature, an information business. When I recruited my last Chief Information Officer at S3, he came from FTSE, the actual index. And to me it was very obvious that this guy's background was going to be very appropriate, because what does someone like FTSE actually trade in? They trade in value-added information, effectively. What do recruitment companies do? They trade in value-added information. So the first thing to do is really understand that information is absolutely central to the very nature of recruitment as an industry. The second point is, if you don't understand what drives your business, you can't replicate it. Of course you can't. So if you don't know why you were successful, to James's point about the rookie, how do they continue to be successful? So actually having that in-depth understanding of what really drives your business is incredibly important. And most businesses will reflect that in having a set of KPIs that they run their business around. One thing I've learned over the years is that not all KPIs are equal by any measure of means, and some are a lot more important than others. Some are really relevant and will make a massive difference. Others might be worth measuring, might be worth encoding into the DNA of your business, but it's not to be as important, it's not to be mission critical. And on that point, what I've also found is what's right isn't always intuitive. In other words, what actually really drives your business isn't necessarily 100% what you just feel, even with many, many years' experience. And I'll give you a good example of that in a moment. And therefore, while intuition has a huge role to play in business, I think, intuition, gut feel, all that sort of stuff, you can't run a business, you can't be successful without an element of that. But don't assume that what you've always done is right because it feels right and it chimes with 20 or 30 years, whatever it might be, of experience. Other point to make really is that macro success is simply micro success on a larger scale. Now that might sound obvious. It's a bit like making the point that, creationists will tell you that there's no such evidence, there's no evidence for macro evolution. And no one's ever seen an animal turn from one type of animal to the other. Well, that's because it's a question of time, right? And it happens on a cellular level over millions of years. Well, people are often very focused on the idea that we have this vision, mission, whatever it might be. But ultimately, whether or not you achieve that will actually be won in feet and inches rather than yards and miles. So if you concentrate at the granular level, the very detailed level, and get that right, then the big exciting visions for your business will actually by necessity follow. And my ultimate point is, everything we really rely on in our lives, the fact that drugs that we're prescribed will actually have a chance of making us better, the fact that when you get on an aircraft it's got a fighting chance of actually landing in one piece on the other side of the world, is based on the scientific method. It's based about fact-based decisions, about actually applying some science. And so it's entirely logical, in my opinion, that you apply that thought process to your business as well. And what's at stake, I think, is actually very interesting, because I was at a presentation a little while ago, and some guys from Boxington Finance, who for 5 years have been tracking the top 50, by turnover, the top 50 growth companies in our sector. And they made a very interesting backward observation, looking at the 5 years previously, when they first did this survey. It's a where are they now, basically. So these are companies that were in the elite of growth, right? These were the guys that were really smashing the ball out of the park 5 years ago. And what's really striking is the fact that 6% of them have gone bust, 4% of them were taken over in distressed circumstances, about 26% had gone backwards. So a third had either gone bust, had been sold under circumstances that didn't suit them, or we're actually going backwards from where they were previously. So success, even when you get it, is not a given for the future. Sustainable success, clearly, this is not just my opinion, it's borne out by evidence, is something that you have to continually work at. So what's at stake about getting these things right, really understanding what drives your business, isn't just the fact that you want to be a more successful business than you currently are. It may actually be a question of preserving what you've currently got. This really talks to my point about the fact that it's the granular stuff that really matters. This is an example taken from recent S3 history. And it really talks about how relatively small variations can have huge consequences to the bottom line. So, for very understandable reasons, I think, unless you were living on Pluto during 2008, the circumstances in the world economy conspired such that it was a pretty disastrous year for all recruitment companies. Now, what might surprise you is that S3's gross profit during that disastrous period actually only declined by 22%. So if you think about it, on the face of that, you'd say, well, that's a pretty good performance, actually. But because of the nature of operational gearing, the operating profit declined by 68%. So that 22% loss of productivity translated to an almost 70% loss of profitability at the bottom line. When we had a slight improvement in the market, to get a more positive spin on it, in 2010, 2011, GP only improved relatively modestly by 15%, but that actually drove an operating profit improvement of 30%. So in other words, in the one downside example, the stakes were at a 300 times multiplier, and on the more positive example, 100. Now you could just as easily, in slightly different circumstances, have seen the upside grow at that kind of 300% plus. Perhaps what would have been required is GP to be improved by 20% or 21%, whatever it might be. What I'm trying to get across here is that the small things matter, and they actually manifest themselves in very big ways. If you get that right, 15 or 20% improvement, let's say, in your productivity, by understanding what drives your business, by potentially investing in something like the Q product, could drive way bigger improvements in your business's performance. Okay, I'll give you a couple of what I hope will be real-world examples, in the sense that you can relate to these, of where I've had experience of analysis and insight really helping a business at a very practical operational level. One is quite a tactical example, and the other one is more strategic. But the other strategic example, which I'll come on to, illustrates very well the other point that I made about not necessarily trusting to intuition, and what you think is actually important isn't necessarily as important, and vice versa. So my first example, I've called the third man. Could easily be a third woman. This relates to a piece of analysis that was done at S3 some years ago, where we looked at what was the upside, what was the value enhancer in terms of the outcome from, in a permanent recruitment situation where you had on the one hand a permanent role where you had one person up for that job, and on the other hand two, and on the other hand three, and on the other hand four. So the extent to which you covered permanent role. Now, I would say, if you ask people who don't really understand recruitment, if I said to, my mum or my dad, right, I've got a situation where I've got a job and I've got one candidate in the frame, and I've got a situation another where I've got 3 candidates in the frame, what is my percentage chance, how much better is my percentage chance of filling the vacancy in the one case as opposed to the other? And I would say, most people would say 3 times. Okay, why wouldn't they? You've got 3 bites of the apple, that's entirely logical and intuitive. When we actually did the analysis, what we found actually was that it was more like 6 times more likely to be filled. So the incremental value in really focusing on those extra slots in the interview process was way disproportionate to covering other jobs with other candidates on a more sort of thinned out kind of basis. If you get an insight into that, that gives you a powerful way of then managing people at that more micro level. You know, because you might have the person that, I've had 10 interviews, boss. I've had bugger all out of it. The guy next to me has got 10 interviews, and yet he's done really well. Without an insight like that, you could be legitimately scratching your head, even if you're a very experienced recruitment manager. So the power of analytics is also relating to focusing at a very, very laser-like kind of way, in a very laser-like way, in the activities that really matter, and helping people become productive. And that makes them more likely to stay. And to my first point about the most important thing, hiring good people and making them stay. The second example I'll give you is actually far more recent, and actually has made quite a big difference in terms of the strategic focus of S3 as a consequence. Now, S3 has always had, or certainly in recent years, a significant permanent and a significant contract business. If you'd actually said to me, and I was asked it constantly by analysts and fund managers, Russell, what do you think the bottom line contribution of a contract versus a permanent placement is? I would have given this answer, and this is with an awful lot of information at my fingertips. Well, look, I know that if I look at the average length that a contract runs, and I times that by the gross profit, then I get a bigger number than if I look at our average permanent fee. However, what I do know is a hell of a lot of our infrastructure, and therefore our cost, appears to be directly related to the size of our contract business. So in other words, the reason we've got a significant amount of people in contract payroll, the reason why we've got 14 lawyers, is very much tied up to the contract piece. So I reckon that if you strip that out, you'd probably find that the lifetime value of a permanent placement as opposed to a contract placement is pretty similar. Now, we had a change in our data architecture that allowed us to get much more granular and answer that question in a more sophisticated way. And what actually came out of that analysis really just astonished me. Because the fact is that even with those additional costs, even with very much weighting the costs in a very fair and proportionate way, what came out was contract was way more profitable. It was way more profitable. And you know what the single most important thing that drove that? Was contract others, right? It was your orphan contractors that you're not paying commission out on. That was the single, within that, that was the single most important thing driving that. So if you want to drive short-term profitability, sack all your recruitment, your contract recruitment. But what was really interesting to me about that was a couple of things. One was it was absolutely gobsmacking to me that the scale, we're not talking about marginal difference here, we're talking about a very significant difference. What we're also talking about is how it didn't chime with my intuitive view of a business that by that stage I'd actually been involved with for 25 years. The final point to make is what that then did was drive a change in strategy, because if I'd been asked before, what's our attitude towards the percentage of permanent versus contract, I would say we're pretty ambivalent. We don't really care, it's opportunistic, It's something we don't drive, it's an outcome rather than input. Now, if you ask my successor as Chief Executive of S3, what is their view on that same question? And it is, our aim is to have the majority of the business coming from contract. Now, you don't want to shift 100% in that other direction because there are very different cash generative characteristics between the two types of business and so on. But it was a very, very interesting, very powerful piece of insight, which was only enabled by us having the ability to, in a more granular way, look at the nature of our business. So hopefully that gives you an idea about how data, more specifically information and insight, really can make a huge difference, even to a very well-established business run by people that frankly did know what they were doing largely. So, in conclusion really, I still would say that the top right-hand thing is the most important thing. It's, if you said to me, and I've been asked many times, what's the most important thing? How do you become a successful recruitment business? Hire good people and keep them. The trouble with that is it's a hell of a lot easier said than done. And I would argue that as boring as you might think analytics and data and information might be, getting it right actually reinforces that element in a very, very profound way. Because if you're empowering people within an environment where they understand what they're doing, they can replicate success, they feel like they're in control of the situation rather than being controlled by circumstances, I would argue that's an incredibly good reason for them to want to stick around within that business. If you give them the tools to scale their business in a scientific way that isn't available to them if they were to go as a consequence of the headhunting call to the company down the road, that's another very powerful reason for them to want to stay with you. So, trying to wrap this all together, the fact is that it gives you some very interesting ways of looking at your business. It gives you an opportunity to drive your business in different directions, potentially in very profoundly different directions. But if it does nothing else, I would argue it also reinforces this point about it's helping you keep hold of your talent, which ultimately in a people business is the single most important thing. So, thanks very much for listening.